Hi, my name's Nina. For as long as I can remember, my family chose my sister over me. Not just once, but over and over, like it was a tradition. They called my dream of becoming a seamstress a hobby, a joke. On Christmas, she mocked the dress I made with my own hands, called it cheap from the market, and my parents sat there in silence. That silence, it was louder than any insult. But what they didn't know was that every stitch I sewed was a promise. A promise that one day I'd stop being their background and take the mic. Do you want to know what happened when I did? I parked a few houses down, the way I always did when I came back here. Even after all these years, the white colonial house at the end of the street felt like a stage where I'd been assigned a role I never auditioned for. It was Christmas Eve in Savannah, damp but not cold. The kind of winter night where the air smells of pine and sweet tea. I stepped out of my car with the pecan pie I'd baked balanced in one hand, my other hand smoothing the dress I'd sewn for tonight. Deep burgundy cotton, fitted at the waist, with a neckline I'd designed to look timeless but modest. It wasn't flashy, it was me. The porch light flickered as I approached, wreaths and red bows hanging on the door. Laughter rolled out from inside, familiar and sharp. I paused for a second, inhaling, then pushed the door open. "Hi, everyone," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. A few people turned, offered distracted greetings. Celine, my aunt, waved from the kitchen doorway. My cousin Elowen held up her phone like she was filming a reality show. I crossed the living room, weaving between clusters of relatives. The dining table was set in the old Southern style, long, polished wood, crystal glasses, candles flickering. I noticed immediately that my name card was missing from the row near the head of the table. Instead, there was a small card by the far end, near the swinging door to the kitchen. Nina. My throat tightened. Same as always. Out of sight. Out of mind. I set the pie down on the sideboard, feeling my fingers tremble against the ceramic dish. "Made this from scratch," I murmured, but no one seemed to hear. I slipped off my coat and took my seat near the back, the chatter at the other end of the table muffled like distant radio. From here, I could see the whole room but not be part of it, just the way they liked it. Then Callista arrived. She always knew how to make an entrance. Her heels clicked on the hardwood as she breezed in wearing a gold dress that caught every flicker of candlelight. Her hair was styled to perfection, makeup camera ready. "Merry Christmas," she sang, air-kissing our parents. "Oh my God, Mom, you've outdone yourself again." Everyone's eyes followed her as she settled into her seat near the center, people leaning in, complimenting her dress. "Who's it by?" someone asked. "Oh, it's from Delorier," she said lightly, naming a designer I knew from the magazines. "Limited edition. You can't find it anywhere." She glanced down the table at me, her smile curling. "And you? Look at that dress. That's cute." She tilted her head. "Did you get it from the market?" Her tone was syrupy, but the room went still for a beat. My mother looked at her plate. My father coughed into his napkin. Nobody said anything. I smoothed the skirt of my dress and smiled faintly. "I made it," I said, my voice even. "Just for tonight." Callista laughed softly, as if I'd told a joke no one else got. "Well, it's bold," she said, turning back to her admirers. Conversation resumed. My chest felt tight, but I kept my face still. Years of practice. Dinner rolled on, plates passed down, silverware clinking. I stayed quiet, tasting little of the food. Across the table, Elowen raised her phone again. I saw the red recording light. Celine caught my eye for a moment, her brows pulling together, then looked away. That small flicker of sympathy felt like a lifeline, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Halfway through dessert, a cousin leaning over to pour wine, accidentally, tipped the bottle. Red liquid splashed across my lap, blooming on the burgundy fabric like a dark flower. "Oh no! I'm so sorry!" she gasped. Before I could speak, Callista's voice cut in. "Don't worry, it's just a cheap dress anyway." The room tittered, half nervous laughter, half curiosity. I dabbed at the stain with my napkin, my movements slow, deliberate. "It's fine," I said. "Accidents happen." Inside, something sharp pressed against my ribs. Not shame anymore. Something else. I excused myself, rising carefully, holding the fabric away from my legs. The hallway bathroom was dimly lit. A mirror hung above the sink I'd stared into as a teenager. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned over the sink. The wine stain looked like a wound, but the stitches held. My stitches always held. I thought about every Christmas past, my name missing from the card list, the gifts given to Callista from all of us when I'd paid for them. My father's absent-minded, she can handle it, whenever she took another jab. I touched the fabric at my waist, feeling the strength of the seams under my fingers. Enough, I whispered. My reflection stared back, eyes darker than I remembered. My lips curved, not into a smile, but something firmer. Back in the dining room, laughter swelled again. Callista's voice rose above it, recounting some story about her latest trip to Los Angeles. I could hear my mother's gentle, "That's our girl," the clinking of glasses, the same script every year, but I wasn't the same quiet little sister anymore. The bathroom light hummed softly above me as I stood in front of the mirror, wine spreading like a bruise across the dress I'd stitched with my own hands. The laughter from the dining room felt muffled now, distant and hollow, as if I were underwater. I dabbed at the stain with a paper towel, but stopped halfway. There was no point. My reflection stared back, older and steadier than the girl I used to be, but tonight that girl pressed her way through my ribs. All it took was a comment about cheap and a splash of wine to peel back years of practice. My fingers tightened around the edge of the sink, and just like that, I was 10 again. It was my birthday, a humid April afternoon. The house smelled of cornbread and lemon polish. My parents had given me a sewing kit wrapped in brown paper. It was the first thing I ever owned that felt like mine. Tiny scissors, a few spools of thread, needles tucked into a velvet square. I spent hours at the kitchen table that day, tongue between my teeth, making a dress for my doll out of scraps from an old curtain. It was crooked, uneven, but it was beautiful to me. I'd held it up, proud, waiting for someone to notice. Callista walked by, then 16. She snatched the doll, turned it in her hand like it was something dirty. "This is ugly," she said, laughing. Before I could protest, she tossed it into the trash. "You can't just make stuff. Clothes have to be perfect." I remember standing there frozen, cheeks burning, my father glancing over his newspaper without looking up. "Let her play," he muttered, but he didn't tell her to stop. My mother said, "Don't cry, Nina. Your sister's just teaching you standards." That was the first time I felt my voice sink back into my chest. Years blurred after that. At 13, I was still wearing Callista's old church dresses, hems let out and taken in again, smelling faintly of her perfume. My mother would press them into my hands and say, "You're lucky. Callista has such good taste. Most girls don't get this." In the laundry room, bags of her cast-offs piled like small mountains. I'd pick through them in silence, trying not to flinch at the stains she'd left. When I tried to say I wanted something of my own, my mother would sigh. "You don't need new when you have nice." Gratitude became another seam I was expected to stitch tight. At 16, I sewed a dress for myself out of denim scraps, wore it to a school dance. Callista took a picture and showed her friends. "Look at my little sister playing designer," she'd say. The photo made its way around school before the dance even ended. I went home early, told my parents I felt sick. Nobody asked why. I kept sewing anyway. In the evenings after homework, in the quiet corner of my room, I'd piece together fabric I found at thrift stores. Sometimes Celine would slip me remnants from her quilting projects, and for a moment I'd feel seen. But most nights it was just me, the hum of my small machine, and the faint sound of Callista's music through the wall. By college, I'd gotten an offer to work part-time at a local fashion studio. It felt like a door cracking open. I left the acceptance letter on my desk one night, planning to sign it in the morning. The next day, it was gone. The studio never called back. Later, I found the letter crumpled in the trash under Callista's makeup wipes. She shrugged when I asked. "It wasn't a real job anyway. You'd embarrass yourself." My mother told me, "She's just looking out for you." I swallowed the words that rose in my throat. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't meant for more. I learned to keep my dreams folded small, like fabric scraps in a shoebox under my bed. I went to community college, studied business instead of design, worked retail. Callista moved to Atlanta, then Los Angeles, her Instagram full of brands and beaches. Every Christmas she came back brighter, louder, more decorated. Every Christmas I sat at the far end of the table, wearing something I'd made but never naming the work. The bathroom mirror fogged slightly from the shower someone had taken earlier. I wiped a circle clear with my palm. My face now looked back at me. 36, hair pinned back, hands steady. But I could still see the 10-year-old behind my eyes, the one clutching a doll's dress pulled from the trash. I straightened, taking a breath. They had trained me to disappear. They'd mistaken my silence for weakness. They thought hand-me-downs would shrink my shape to fit their picture. But while they weren't looking, I'd been building something out of the scraps they left me. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing past my phone to the small black flash drive labeled Lyora Designs. Inside it were months of sketches, contracts, orders, a life they didn't even know existed. I slipped it into my pocket, felt its weight against my palm like a promise. Back in the hall, the sound of clinking glasses reached me again, but it didn't sting this time. I glanced once more at the stain on my dress, burgundy on burgundy, almost invisible now. They tried to erase me, I whispered to my reflection, but I've been designing my return all along. The murmur of voices from the dining room drifted into the hallway as I walked slowly back toward the living room, wiping my hands on a folded napkin. The wine stain had dried into a muted shadow on my dress, but my heartbeat was still loud in my ears. It was later now, closer to 9, and the smells of pecan pie and mulled cider clung to the air. People were moving chairs, gathering near the fireplace for the family's annual card exchange. This was the part of the night that used to thrill me as a child, when the tree lights blinked and names were called, and you felt, even for a heartbeat, like you belonged. I stepped into the living room quietly. The fire was going, logs snapping in the grate. Gift boxes and tissue paper were scattered across the rug. My father had already taken his favorite chair, drink in hand, nodding along to something one of the uncles was saying. My mother moved like a conductor, passing out envelopes, making sure everyone was seated. Callista, naturally, was at the center of the sofa with a throw pillow behind her back, her dress gleaming under the lights. She had changed her earrings since dinner, small, deliberate details that never slipped past her. I sat at the edge of the couch near Celine, who gave me a brief glance but didn't speak. The cousins were cross-legged on the floor, Elowen still holding her phone as if the whole evening was a live feed. My name card wasn't on the coffee table, but there was a plain white envelope resting on a side table next to the lamp. "Okay, everyone," my mother said brightly. "Let's start with Callista." She handed her an envelope edged in gold. Callista tore it open with a little flourish, eyes darting to make sure we were all watching. "Oh, Mom," she said, voice softening into something theatrical. "This is beautiful." She cleared her throat and read aloud. "To my shining star, from the moment you were born, you lit up every room you entered. I am so proud of the woman you've become, elegant, strong, and destined for great things. Love always, Mom." The room cooed, a few people clapping lightly. Callista pressed the card to her chest. "You're going to make me cry," she said, laughing. My mother touched her arm. "You've earned it, sweetheart. You know how to do things right. Not everyone has your sense." Her eyes flicked toward me for half a second, then moved on. Celine shifted next to me, but stayed silent. My throat felt dry. I reached for my envelope, plain white with my name scribbled in blue ink. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper, still hoping, just hoping, for something small, a line that showed I mattered. "Merry Christmas, Nina," it read, "wishing you a peaceful year." That was it. No memory, no warmth, just 8 words floating on a blank page. I looked up. No one was watching me. Callista was showing her card to Elowen, who angled her phone for a picture. My father said something about the firewood. My mother handed out more envelopes. The contrast sat heavy in my lap, louder than the conversation around me. I folded the card, slid it back into the envelope, and smoothed the edges. My hands trembled slightly, but I steadied them on my knees. I had stopped expecting anything years ago, but some small, unkillable part of me still felt the sting. "That's a nice dress," one of the aunts said suddenly, glancing at my lap where the stain was. Her voice carried a hint of pity. "Thank you," I said. Before I could say more, my mother's voice rose above the chatter. "You know, Callista always knew how to use her looks," she said with a chuckle. "Smart girl. She's got prospects. Nina only sews." A ripple of awkward laughter followed. My father looked at his drink. I let out a small sound that could pass for a laugh. Inside, my thoughts were sharp as pins. Even my silence gets less love than her noise. Callista leaned back, smiling like a cat in sunlight. "Well, Mom's not wrong," she said lightly. "It's not a crime to have standards." I smiled faintly, but my mind felt like it had clicked into a new gear. All these years I had been holding scraps, thinking maybe if I stitched them carefully enough, they'd form something whole. But the pattern wasn't random. The pattern was chosen. I excused myself, rising from the couch as Celine shifted to give me space. "I'm going to get some air," I said. No one stopped me. Upstairs, the guest room was as it had always been, plain quilt on the bed, a dresser that still smelled faintly of cedar, a small lamp throwing warm light against the walls. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed. My purse lay on the nightstand where I'd left it earlier. I reached into the bottom drawer of the dresser where I kept things from past visits. There they were, cards from Christmases before, tied in a thin ribbon. I untied it, spread them out on the bed, each one a variation on the same theme. Happy holidays. Stay well. All the best. No stories, no warmth. Callista's cards, glimpsed in her room once, were full of paragraphs, memories, photographs tucked inside. Looking at the cards lined up like a timeline, something inside me hardened. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't oversight. This was a pattern, year after year, edited down, pared away. I gathered the cards back into a stack and held them against my chest, not for comfort but as evidence. I thought of my flash drive in my purse, the sketches, the orders, the life they didn't know I had. I wasn't invisible, I murmured to the empty room. I was being edited out on purpose. Outside, laughter rose again from the living room. The sound no longer cut me. It was just noise now, a background track. I placed the cards back in the drawer, closed it gently, and stood up. This time, I wasn't just going to absorb it. I was taking note. I was keeping receipts. I closed the drawer of cards in the guest room and sat back, palms flat against the quilt, listening to the muted chorus of laughter drifting up from downstairs. It was 10:30 now. The house had slipped into its usual Christmas rhythm. Wine glasses clinking, TV murmuring low, Callista's voice rising above the rest. But here, in this small room at the far end of the hall, the noise felt distant, like waves on a shore I'd long since left. The stack of cards sat like a weight in my chest. I stared at the blank space on the wall, my reflection faint in the window pane, and a sentence floated up uninvited. "This is who you've always been to them." Background stitching. I reached for my laptop from my overnight bag and set it on the nightstand. The glow from the screen lit the room in a cool blue. I typed in my password, clicked open a folder marked Lyora Originals. Pages of sketches filled the screen, coats, gowns, casual pieces, each one a small rebellion I'd built in silence. Contracts, invoices, patents filed in my name. Names of clients who had never once heard my family's last name, only Lyora. My secret world was tidy, thriving, entirely my own. The sight steadied me. My hands stopped shaking. The glow of the screen pulled me backward in time. I remembered another late night, more than a decade ago, when the same hands had stitched not for me, but for Callista. I was 22, still living at home, saving every cent to apply to the Savannah School of Design. Callista had a pageant the next day, some regional competition. Her designer had backed out, or maybe she'd changed her mind about the dress at the last minute. She came to my room, dramatic tears and all. "Nina, you're the only one who can fix this. Please. If I don't look perfect, I'll lose everything." I had stayed up all night on the floor of her bedroom, pins between my teeth, hemming a sequined gown while she scrolled on her phone. "I'll tell them you saved the day," she promised as I worked. "Everyone will know who really did this." At dawn, the dress fit her like a glove. She twirled once, smiled into the mirror. "You're a miracle worker," she said, hugging me briefly before sweeping out with the gown. I slept for 2 hours, then dragged myself to my retail job. That evening, I watched the event on local TV. Callista stepped on stage, dazzling under the lights, and when the host asked about her stunning dress, she smiled sweetly and said, "I designed it myself." "It's my passion." The audience applauded. My name wasn't mentioned. When she came home with the crown, she tossed me a perfunctory thanks and went to bed. My mother called from the kitchen. "See, Nina? That's how you make something of yourself. Your sister knows what she's doing." I felt the thread of resentment knot a little tighter inside me. Another memory layered itself over the first. I was 23, waiting for an acceptance letter from the Institute of Design in New York. I had poured myself into that portfolio, sketches, hand-sewn samples, essays. I checked the mail every day for weeks. Nothing came. My mother would say, "Don't get your hopes up, honey. That's a tough school." My father said, "It's expensive anyway. Maybe it's for the best." Callista was already living partly in Atlanta then, coming home between gigs. One afternoon, while cleaning up in Callista's room, my mother always asked me to help out when she came home, I found a torn envelope under a pile of magazines. It bore the Institute's crest, addressed to me. Inside was the letter. "Congratulations, accepted with scholarship, orientation date." My chest went cold. I sat on the edge of her bed holding it, the sound of her shower running down the hall. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, I held up the letter. "Why didn't you give this to me?" She shrugged. "You really think you'd survive in New York? That's not you, Nina. Sewing's a hobby. I'm saving you from a mistake." Her tone was light, but her eyes were flat. "Besides, Mom and Dad can't afford for you to run off like that. Someone has to be reasonable." She plucked the letter from my hands, folded it, and dropped it back on the dresser. "Go help Mom with dinner." I didn't tell anyone. Maybe I should have screamed, but I'd learned by then that noise only echoed. Instead, I folded the betrayal small and tucked it away like a fabric scrap. I found a job at a local boutique, took night classes, and kept sewing in the quiet hours. Outwardly, nothing changed, but inside the seam had split. I stopped showing my work to my family. I stopped asking them to see me. The memory dissolved, and I was back in the guest room, the laptop glow painting my hands pale. I closed it slowly. My chest rose and fell once, steady. That was then. This is now. They had taken credit, taken opportunities, but they hadn't taken the skill from my fingers. They hadn't stopped the designs from coming. I had built a business under their noses, hidden behind a name they never bothered to ask about. I reached for my old sketchbook in the bottom of my bag, the one with frayed edges, pages full of ideas from years when I thought no one would ever see them. I set it next to the flash drive labeled Leora 2020 Originals. The weight of both together felt like a key. "I never stopped designing," I said softly to the empty room. "I just stopped showing them." Downstairs, a burst of laughter rose, Callista's voice carrying as always. I shut the laptop and stood, smoothing my dress. In the mirror above the dresser, my eyes looked different. Calm, but with a line of steel running through them now. I wasn't the quiet little sister sewing in the shadows anymore. I was someone who had built her own stage. "If they couldn't hear me whispering," I murmured, picking up the flash drive, "they're about to hear me roar." I stayed in the guest room a few minutes longer, listening to the echo of my own heartbeat instead of the music and chatter downstairs. The flash drive sat in my palm, warm from my touch, a tiny piece of metal holding years of sketches, invoices, contracts, the life I had built in secret. I slipped it back into my purse, straightened my dress as best I could despite the dried wine stain, and smoothed my hair. It was late now, the house dimmer than before. From the top of the stairs, I could see the glow of the living room where the family had migrated after dinner. The fireplace flickered low, gift boxes scattered like confetti around the tree. The same rituals I'd watched every year since I was a child. But tonight, the air felt heavier, as if it knew what I was about to do. I walked slowly down the stairs, each step quiet, rehearsing my breathing. By the time I reached the bottom, I'd folded my expression into something neutral. I crossed into the living room and slipped behind a cluster of cousins who were laughing over a card game. On the coffee table lay the printed program for our family's toasts, a tradition my parents had started decades ago. Each year, names were listed, each person given a slot to speak a few words of thanks or reflection. I scanned the sheet once, then again. My name wasn't there. Elowen, perched on the arm of a sofa, noticed my pause. She leaned closer and whispered, "Maybe a printing mistake?" She gave a small shrug, eyes flicking nervously toward Callista, who was sitting center stage on the hearth, glass of wine in hand, recounting a story about her latest photo shoot in Miami. People laughed in the right places. She tossed her hair and checked her phone between sentences, screen glowing bright against her manicured fingers. I forced a smile at Elowen. "Sure. A mistake." My voice came out steady, but inside my chest a slow heat began to rise. I sat on the edge of an ottoman, hands folded in my lap, listening as Callista described the grind of building her brand, how exhausting it was to manage her team. "But it's all worth it," she said, "when you see women wearing your designs." Everyone murmured approval. I slipped my phone from my purse and unlocked it. Out of habit, I opened Instagram. The first thing on my feed was Callista's newest post from just minutes ago. A high-gloss photo of her in a silver-white gown captioned, "Callista's Winter Sparkle, designed in-house for a woman like me." The fabric shimmered under studio lights, the neckline and drape unmistakable. It was my design, moonlight pearl from my private sketchbook, a piece I'd never released publicly. She'd changed one or two details, but not enough to disguise it. Thousands of likes already, comments full of praise. "Genius! Iconic! Your best work yet!" My thumb hovered over the screen. A dozen memories of nights at my sewing table came flooding back. Her popping into my room to borrow ideas, me brushing it off because I thought sisters shared things. I glanced up. She was watching me now, just for a second, a tiny smirk at the corner of her mouth before she looked away. My father tapped his glass with a spoon. "All right, folks, let's wrap it up. Wonderful toasts this year." He didn't look at me. My mother clapped her hands lightly, eyes shining at Callista. "You were wonderful, darling," she said. "Such poise." I stood, still holding my phone, and moved toward the table where the leftover glasses were lined up. The heat in my chest had settled into something cool, deliberate. I picked up an unused champagne glass. The stem felt solid in my fingers. My father chuckled nervously. "We already finished, sweetie," he said, half apologetic. "We're done with the toasts." I raised the glass anyway. "Then let this be the first toast of next year," I said softly. But my voice carried. The room quieted. One where we stop pretending. I let the words hang, not filling the silence the way I used to. Then I set the glass down gently and walked out of the circle before anyone could respond. The hallway was dim, the Christmas lights reflecting off the polished wood floors. My pulse was steady now, like a metronome. Behind me, voices rose in low confusion. Someone muttered, "What was that about?" Someone else laughed nervously. I kept walking. Near the coat closet, Celine appeared, stepping out from the kitchen doorway. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "You're not crazy," she said under her breath. "I saw her copy your sketch years ago. I never forgot." I stopped, looked at her. For a second, the old instinct, to minimize, to deflect, rose up, but I let it pass. "Good," I said quietly. "I'm done whispering." Our eyes held. She nodded once, a small but solid confirmation that I wasn't alone, even if I'd felt that way for years. I continued down the hall to the side door that led to the porch. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine from the wreaths. I leaned against the railing, phone still in my hand. Through the window, I could see Callista throwing her head back in laughter, my mother touching her arm, my father pouring more wine. They hadn't even noticed the warning. Or maybe they had and chose to ignore it, the way they'd ignored so much. I opened my notes app and began typing. Names of clients, dates of sketches, screenshots of posts, a breadcrumb trail of every time my work had been lifted. I'd saved it all, but tonight was the first time I felt ready to use it. My thumb hesitated over the send button. Not yet. Timing mattered. I turned off my phone, slipped it into my purse, and straightened up. The night sky over Savannah was clear, the stars sharp. Behind me, the party's noise swelled and receded like an ocean tide. I thought of the girl who used to sew doll clothes on her bedroom floor and believed one day someone in this house would be proud of her. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built an empire in silence and was ready to make noise on her own terms. That was their final warning, I murmured to myself, watching my breath form small clouds in the cold air, and they didn't even hear it. The notifications lit up my screen right as I upped my jacket in the hallway. Callista's story was trending, a short video, my dress at dinner, with a laughing emoji plastered over it. Caption: "Guess not everyone has taste." I inhaled, heart pounding. It felt like a broadcast, like she'd lit a flare pointing straight at me. I slipped back inside where the party's noise was thinning, the after-dinner chatter soft but still alive. A few people lingered, hugging, collecting coats. I moved quietly toward the group gathered near the tree. Callista, poised as ever, chattered with a visiting family friend, someone I knew had business ties in George's garment circles. I saw the man fiddle his phone, perhaps seeing the story as it spread. "Hey," the friend said, glancing at me. His eyes flicked to Callista's story on his phone, then to me. "That's interesting." He smiled weakly. I didn't speak. Someone behind me murmured, "Did you see what she posted?" A cousin nudged another. The room shifted, pulled in by the tension I'd ignited. Then, out of nowhere, a video began playing on a cousin's tablet. It was footage from an old Christmas party. I was small, maybe 9 or 10. My face red, tears in eyes, voice trembling. The audio was muffled, but edited to sound like I was sobbing unprovoked. Callista's voice overlaid. "Acting again? She always needed to be the center of attention." The room fell silent. Aunt Margaret's jaw dropped. Uncle John stared at me like he'd just recognized a stranger. Callista leaned forward, her lips taut. "See?" she said, voice cold. "She's always been sensitive." The accusation hung like smoke. I steadied myself. No flinch, no gasp. My mind sorted through the memory. That night I had cried because she called me adopted in front of their friends, telling everyone I didn't belong. I had held those tears inside for years, letting her rewrite the moment. Now she was twisting it further, casting me as unstable. I walked forward, my steps measured. I stopped in front of Callista, close enough she could feel the breath from my words. "That video," I said quietly. "Want to tell them why I was crying? Or should I?" Her face froze. A gasp from someone near the back made a ripple. I turned to the guests. It was the night she told everyone I wasn't real family, said I was adopted to embarrass me. Remember that? My voice was calm, even. "Mama said it," someone whispered. Callista's hands trembled. She opened her mouth, then closed it. My mother's eyes filled with confusion. My father looked away. My aunt gasped, "That did happen." I nodded. I didn't stay to let her explain. I turned and walked out into the hallway. My pulse was steady now, the adrenaline narrowing my attention to the path ahead. In the low light, I passed Celine, who stood quiet, eyes wide. I saw Elowen cower behind her phone screen, as if shielding herself. I reached the staircase and paused. The house sounded quieter now, glasses clinking softly, voices muffled. I wasn't crying, though I felt the echo of 50 Christmases worth of tears. They had tried to bury me in lie after lie. Tonight, I'd unearthed one truth. As I stepped downward, I whispered. I warned her, but she still thought I'd never fight back. Sunlight crept through the lace curtains in thin, delicate strands, painting faint patterns across the wooden floorboards of the breakfast room. The house was hushed, but not with peace. It was the kind of silence that followed a storm, the strained quiet of people pretending nothing had broken the night before, even though the cracks were still spreading underneath. Outside, the Georgia pines stirred in the thin morning breeze, their whispering branches carrying the secrets of generations. I paused at the threshold, hand grazing the doorframe, and watched. My parents moved with slow, deliberate care. My father pouring black coffee into china cups, my mother setting out biscuits on a porcelain plate with a smile just too tight. Callista sat near the center of the long table, her posture perfect, her face unreadable in the warm glow of morning light. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady but carrying a weight I could not disguise. Every head turned. My father cleared his throat, as though rehearsing neutrality. "Good morning," he replied. "Let's just enjoy the day." I nodded once, nothing more, and patted across the rug until I reached the table's end. The china glimmered. Silver spoons clinked faintly. Steam spiraled from cups of coffee, fragrant and bitter. A festive garland, left from last night's gathering, drooped from the chandelier. But all of it, the warmth, the colors, the familiar comfort, felt staged. The table was no longer a place for family. It was a battleground disguised with linen and polish. I picked up a biscuit, broke it in half, and bit down. The buttery texture filled my mouth, but it tasted like cold iron, heavy and metallic. I swallowed hard, the food lodging like a stone in my throat. Callista's eyes flicked toward me, quick, sharp, like a blade being tested against skin. Then, just as quickly, she looked away, expressionless. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. My mother turned her attention back to Callista, smiling at her with that familiar softness reserved only for her fragile daughter. My father adjusted the coffee pot as though its weight demanded his full concentration. But the truth of last night lingered in the air, invisible but undeniable. I cleared my throat. The faint hum of conversation stuttered, dropped. Even the clinking of silverware seemed to fade. "Do you even realize?" I began slowly, my voice low but slicing through the quiet. "How many years you let her ruin for me?" My mother's spoon paused mid-stir. Her eyes, once sharp, dulled with hesitation. She placed the spoon gently back on the saucer. "We thought you could take it," she said softly. "She always needed more attention. She was fragile." Fragile. The word curdled in my chest. I leaned forward slightly, the edge of my voice cutting now. "Maybe she needed more because we made her the star. At my expense." My father leaned in too, but not with anger. His expression was calm, detached, almost clinical. "You were always the strong one," he said. "We never worried about you." His face carried kindness, but it was the kindness of a stranger, a man recalling someone he once read about, not someone he had truly known. My chair scraped against the hardwood as I pushed back. The silverware rattled, a metallic echo of defiance. "Maybe you should have," I said. The words dropped like a stone in water, sending ripples through the room. Silence closed in, tighter than before. My mother's napkin trembled in her lap. Weak morning light glinted through the lace, casting fractured patterns over the table. No one spoke, no one moved. And then, deliberately, I reached into my bag. My fingers closed around the smooth surface of my tablet, and I laid it flat on the table. The room stiffened, as though the air itself had braced for impact. The first thing to appear on the glowing screen was a logo. Leora Designs, bold, professional, unmistakable. Then the slideshow began. Images slid across the screen, pages from polished lookbooks, glossy spreads from media outlets, contracts with boutiques in New York and Atlanta. Photos of models draped in designs I had sketched late at night when no one believed in me. Emails from fashion editors, screenshots of sales orders, whispers of a name that was growing louder in circles that mattered. Someone gasped. Callista's eyes widened, her practiced brightness dimming by degrees. The confidence she wore like armor slipped. Beside her, Eloin's phone slipped from her knee and clattered to the floor. Celine, usually silent in family matters, allowed the faintest smile to curl at her lips. "You didn't see me?" I said, my voice carrying over the crackling quiet. "I've been working in silence. You just weren't listening." My mother's face drained of color. My father's hand hovered over a basket of rolls, suspended mid-reach, as though frozen in place. Callista's mouth sagged, the poise she clung to faltering. Her gaze darted between me and the glowing screen, as if wishing it all away. And then, of all people, Uncle George spoke. His voice, deep and gravelly, cut through the thick silence. "Maybe," he said slowly, deliberately, "it's time we stop pretending who the real star is." The room stilled. His words landed heavier than any confrontation. They cracked open a truth no one wanted to face. Callista shot to her feet. Her chair scraped violently across the floor. Her face burned red, lips trembling. For a heartbeat, I thought she might scream, might fling one of her famous accusations, but no words came, none at all. Instead, she spun and rushed out of the room. Her heels struck the hardwood in sharp staccato until they faded into the distance, down the hall, around the corner. The echoes lingered like aftershocks. Furniture rattled faintly. The entire house seemed to draw in its breath again. I remained where I was, seated at the table's end, breathing evenly. Around me, the family shifted, whispered, exchanged looks they hadn't dared to before. The revelation had done what my voice alone never could. It cracked their curated illusion wide open. I didn't need applause. I didn't need their validation. For the first time, I understood that all I needed was proof, and I had placed it before them, undeniable. The morning light filtering through the curtains no longer felt warm. It was colder now, sharper, cutting through the dust that had settled over years of silence. The table no longer felt like a place of belonging, but I felt steadier than I ever had. I lifted my chin, my voice calm, final. "This house was never a home," I said, letting the words hang like a verdict. But today, I took back the keys. The front porch groaned faintly beneath my boots as I stepped out, the tablet firm in my grip, its glow a kind of weapon in daylight. The air was cold enough that my breath hung in front of me in pale clouds, dissolving as quickly as they formed. Around me, the world looked deceptively still, pine needles shivering in the wind, damp grass glistening where frost had melted, the wood of the porch stained darker from the morning dew. Behind me, the house buzzed like a hive recently disturbed, voices low, conversations fractured, footsteps fading as guests slipped out. The echo of plates clinking and chairs shifting carried faintly from the dining room. Just minutes earlier, the house had been crowded, noisy, almost suffocating. Now it was emptying, the air growing sharper, clearer, less forgiving. I scanned the lawn. A small crowd had already gathered, uncles and aunts who had lingered after breakfast, cousins shifting uncertainly at the edge of the gravel drive, a pair of neighbors who had come by with gifts tucked under their arms, and at the very front, Meredith. The boutique owner I'd met only a month ago, her red scarf snapping in the breeze, her heels sunk slightly into the soft earth. They weren't just watching, they were waiting. The tablet in my hand cast a faint reflection across my face. It was my turn to speak. The front door creaked, and Callista appeared in the frame. She lingered at the threshold, unwilling to step fully outside. Her face was composed, but her shoulders drooped as though some invisible weight had bent them overnight. Her hair, once meticulously styled, now had stray strands whipping loose in the cold air. She avoided my eyes. The silence stretched, heavy and brittle. I drew in a deep breath, tasting pine and damp earth on the wind, and turned the screen outward toward the crowd. Meredith was the first to break it. She stepped forward, arms folded, her eyes sharp. "Excuse me," she said, voice carrying in the stillness. She looked first at Callista, then at me. "So, Callista tells people she's your lead designer. That's interesting." Her tone was polite, but the words cut. Gasps rippled through the cousins clustered together. Callista's fingers tightened around her phone. I nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Yes," I said evenly. "That's what she's been telling people." My thumb swiped across the tablet, pulling up the video app. "But let's see something a little more accurate." With a tap, the screen lit up brighter, the audio spilling faintly into the cold air. The footage was from a live fashion panel I'd attended months ago. The banner across the bottom read, "Leora, 100% Nina's brand." Every piece designed, approved, and created by Nina. The camera had panned over my sketches, my models, my face. Applause filled the recording, muffled but unmistakable. My name scrolled across the ticker. There was no ambiguity, no room for spin. For a moment, the only sound was the faint crackle of the video and the restless stirring of wind in the trees. Meredith's lips parted in shock. One of the younger cousins clapped a hand over her mouth. Uncle George took a long step forward, jaw tight. Callista stood frozen, her face drained of color. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the porch wood, sliding toward me. She made no move to pick it up. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The silence was working for me now. Uncle George cleared his throat, his voice deep and steady. "She's lied enough," he said firmly. The words weren't dramatic, but their weight landed like a stone in the pond, rippling through the crowd. Celine, who had been quiet all morning, added her voice. She straightened her back, chin lifted, and said with surprising calm, "And we all let her. That ends today." Her words carried the weight of someone who had stitched truths into silence for years, only now choosing to unravel them. Callista's lips trembled. She tried to speak, to summon some version of her charm, but no words came. She stood on the porch like a statue cracked down the middle. My gaze shifted to my parents. They were a portrait of unease. My mother's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. My father tugged at his collar as though it were choking him, his composure faltering. Their expressions were masks, unsettled, protective, but unwilling to admit what had just been laid bare before everyone. And then, from nowhere, a raindrop struck my cheek. Cold, startling. I tilted my head slightly upward. The clouds were rolling fast, silver edges overtaking the bright blue. More droplets followed, faint but insistent, dotting the wood of the porch and speckling the shoulders of those gathered. I drew in another breath and spoke, my voice quiet but unwavering. "You asked why I never fought harder. This is why. Because truth doesn't need to scream. Truth speaks for itself." I tucked the tablet under my arm, squared my shoulders, and stepped off the porch. The crowd parted instinctively, as though giving me passage. My heels clicked sharp against the damp pavement, each step deliberate. I did not look back. Behind me, I heard Callista's voice break into the air, high, desperate, fractured, but no one echoed her. No one followed. Instead, footsteps joined mine. Meredith caught up, matching my pace. Her red scarf whipped across her shoulder in the wind. "Nina," she said, her voice crisp. "We'd like to carry Leora this spring." I stopped mid-step, surprised but not unprepared. I turned slightly, met her gaze. "Talk to my manager," I said, the words calm, steady, professional. She smiled. It wasn't pity, wasn't politeness. It was respect. I returned her nod and continued walking toward my car, parked under the old oak tree. Behind me, Callista remained frozen on the porch, the wind tugging at her gown, her figure smaller than it had ever seemed before. She didn't follow. She couldn't. I hadn't burned the bridge. I'd outgrown it. And there is nothing more final than that. The first morning of the new year in Seattle was all soft edges and muted sounds, a drizzle that tapped the windows like a polite visitor, the faint hiss of my kettle as it came to a boil, the creak of old wooden floors under my bare feet. I had moved here 3 weeks ago, just after Christmas, packing my life into neat boxes, leaving behind the home where I had been a shadow for so long. Now, sunlight pooled weakly through gray clouds. My new apartment was small but full of light, pale walls, sketches pinned like constellations across them, a sewing table by the window facing a rain-washed skyline. Jazz whispered from a radio, mingling with the smell of Earl Grey as I poured hot water into my cup. For the first time in years, my hands weren't shaking. I set the mug down, arranged swatches of silk and wool in a circle on my desk. The colors felt like breaths of possibility, muted plum, soft pearl, a daring streak of crimson. Seattle was colder, quieter, but it fit me like a well-cut jacket. I wasn't here to chase applause. I was here to work, to create, to breathe. My phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number, voicemail left. I hesitated before pressing play. It was my mother's voice, fainter than I remembered. "Nina, it's Mom. We didn't know how else to keep the peace. Callista's not doing well. She doesn't talk to us now. We were wrong. Maybe we should have." A sigh, a rustle. I hope you're okay. Click. I stared at the phone, thumb hovering over the screen. I felt the weight of every holiday where I'd stood at the edges, where her silence had been a curtain. I didn't feel anger, just a slow, deep ache, like pressing on a healed bruise. I deleted the message, not as punishment, but as permission. Permission for myself to move forward. A week later, Celine came to visit. She knocked softly, carrying a paper bag of pastries and a grin that didn't quite hide the exhaustion of travel. "Seattle suits you," she said, stepping into my small living room. "It's quiet," I replied. "Quiet is good." We sat by the window, drinking coffee, looking out at the rain. She reached into her purse and handed me a flyer. "You should come see this. They're showcasing your early sketches at a little gallery in Pioneer Square. They called it Silent Threads." My eyebrows rose. "I didn't submit anything." "They found it through one of your old teachers. Apparently, you signed one of the drawings. For the girl who stitched in silence. It's already making rounds online." I let out a small laugh. "Let it. I'm not hiding anymore." That Saturday, I went. The gallery smelled faintly of wood polish and wet umbrellas. My sketches, crooked, tentative, hopeful, hung framed along the walls. One piece stopped me, a rough pencil drawing of a dress I'd imagined at 16, signed with the words Celine had mentioned. Seeing it there felt like meeting a younger version of myself. The girl bent over a machine at midnight, making beauty no one would see. A couple whispered behind me, pointing at the caption. One said, "She didn't shout, she sewed." The other murmured, "That's going viral." I smiled. For years I'd thought survival meant silence. Now I understood. Silence can be a seed if you plant it right. Celine arrived a moment later, umbrella dripping, cheeks flushed from the cold. She squeezed my hand. "This is what you built, all of it." "I know," I said softly. "And it's enough." When I returned home, I pinned a new piece of paper on my vision board above my desk. It read, "Springline, rooted." The letters slanted slightly, like tree branches reaching. Beneath it, I clipped a small card I'd written to myself. "Next year, I'll send my own card." I poured another cup of tea, looked out at the city. Somewhere far away, in a house that had never been mine, old patterns were cracking. Here, in this quiet apartment, I was shaping something new. I didn't need applause or permission or the family's version of love. I needed this. Fabric, rain, a steady hand. I needed to hear myself. I never needed the mic. I just needed them to hear me. Sometimes, the loudest voices aren't the ones shouting. They're the ones finally being heard after years of silence. Nina's story reminds us that even in the face of deep family bias and betrayal, you can rise, with grace, with truth, and without needing anyone's permission. Have you ever stayed quiet for too long, waiting for someone to finally see you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this one moved you, don't forget to subscribe. More powerful real-life stories are coming your way.